short summary of the eBarns on-farm research. We have a couple of different speakers lined up today, and we hope you all enjoy it. So here's an overview of our water quality team. There are some of us that's new and some of us that you may have seen already. Matt, Paige, and Rachel have been here for over a year, but within the last year, Courtney, myself, and Jocelyn have all started. So we are some newer faces to the water quality team. You can see we all cover a varying amounts of areas of the Western Lake Erie Basin, and we all have our contact information there. So just to highlight a couple of the other things our team has coming up, we do offer our Water Quality Wednesdays this spring. We just had our first one last week, but the second Water Quality Wednesday will be here at the end of February. It's going to be a Cover Crops Volume 2, going a little more in depth on some cover crop topics. You'll see some speakers and presentations and information from a variety of sources like Midwest Cover Crops Council, Ohio State, and the USDA Agriculture Research Service. And then our last Water Quality Wednesday for this spring will be in March, on March 29th. That one, you're going to see some H2 Ohio and Sea Grant information. It's going to be a wetlands and H2 Ohio update. If you're interested in either of those, you can reach out to our water quality team or our website and sign up for either of those. Just for looking past this webinar, our fifth webinar in the CLM series, we're going to be doing a cover crops for livestock grazing topic. It's going to be on April 3rd. You'll hear speakers like Dr. Chris Teutsch and Dr. Hannah Poffenberger, both are from the University of Kentucky, and they will go over topics in that cover crops for livestock grazing topic. As for today, here are today's speakers. You'll hear from Dr. Brady Campbell, the OSU Small Ruminant Specialist. You'll hear from Dr. Jessica Pempak. She's a research animal specialist with the USDA. And then lastly, you'll hear from Courtney Krieger, one of our own water quality team, Extension Associates. She is the Extension Associate up in Fulton, Lucas, and Williams counties. And then I'm going to stop sharing, and Brady, whenever you're ready.
Awesome. Can you hear me okay, Amber?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. I tried to turn my video on this morning, and I guess it's a Monday morning for it. It does not want to do it, so my apologies there.
That's okay.
All right. Should see the intro slide now?
Yes, I can see your slide. You should be all good to go.
Very good. All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and big shout out to you folks for letting me join today. Appreciate the opportunity. As Amber said, my name is Brady Campbell. I'm assistant professor here in the Department of Animal Sciences, located on the Worcester campus, and the state small ruminant extension specialist. So anything sheep and goat related, I'm kind of the contact in the state. Been kind of busy here as of recent. We're in the midst of Lamageddon, if you would. So several phone calls coming into the office here over the past several weeks related to some challenges and some highlights that producers across the state have been having in their small ruminant operations. So today, Amber asked me to jump on board to talk a little bit about eBarns and how we conduct on-farm livestock research. I work pretty closely with two other collaborators with the eBarns program. Really, the credit needs to go to Garth Ruff. He's our field specialist in the beef cattle area. He kind of spearheaded this effort and was able to put together this project nicely. But I'm pretty proud about that eBarns contains a lot of information related to small ruminants. So just as a brief outline, we'll talk about what eBarns is. Hopefully several of you are getting pretty excited about the opportunities that we have here in terms of participation. It is a bit different for those that are familiar with eFields. This is just the sister publication to it, if you would, directly related to animals, livestock production, manure application, and their feedstuffs. Talk just briefly about some trial protocols that we as a small team have kind of put together, evaluation, and what our publication timeline really looks like. So in 2022 here, you can see this was our first set of eBarn reports that were put out. So really thinking about why eBarns, and we're really kind of trying to put into play the translation of research. And My appointment here at the university is 80% extension, 20% research. So I spend a lot of time not only out in the fields, but also with a lot of our county A&R educators and trying to figure out how we can give the data back to our producers, the real folks that need it. Right. We spend a lot of time here at the university and we use a lot of grant dollars to create a lot of good data, a lot of good information. But I think sometimes we fall just short in terms of getting that data translated appropriately beyond the researcher level and putting it to the application on the farm. And so that's always been kind of one of my goals when I started in September of 21 to really make the data that we generate here more accessible and more applicable to the producer. So when we think about it, animal sciences, the research, and it gets to that scientific journal stage, but again, we kind of fail that farmer application. And really, that's what we are here to do in extension. So what we're looking for the eBarns is really the summaries of applied farm level projects that are really livestock related. And so there's a lot of different colleges and departments that we can work with in order to get this accomplished. Of course, we've got several folks that are more than willing to assist, whether they're specialists here in the department or they're a specialist in a specific area in animal sciences related to your projects. Vet Med has done a really nice job of jumping on board and looking at some health attributes to some of our farming operations. And then FABE, Agriculture and Biological Engineering, they've done a really nice job as it goes to the autonomy of some of this equipment. Again, a lot of that's going to be in the eFields report, but when it's related directly to forages and how they apply to the nutritive value, that's kind of where they're going to come into play. We've already talked about the forages and nutrient management, and really, from my perspective, I'm more of a systems approach. When I do a lot of my research, I like to take a look at an operation from a 30,000-foot view and really coming back and asking those questions to those producers, or just having a chance to sit down and have a chat with them to see what's gone well over the past few years and what have been some challenges, and how can we take some of those challenges to find and address some of those questions. And of course, we can't manage what we don't measure. So I think that's the biggest thing that we need to realize with some of our livestock parameters. Again, I won't go in depth, but this is a really nice background of what eBarns is. And again, eBarns is available online for those that are interested in taking a look at it. Please feel to shoot me an email. My information is available at the end of the slides here. I'm happy to get you in contact with myself and Garth and Jason Hartshoe to get involved. And I'm also happy to kind of help direct you to where this information is online. But really, I think what we need to take a look at is this last line, that the program is dedicated to delivering timely and relevant, data-driven, and actionable information. So with livestock and forage research, where is the most applied research occurring, where and why? Realistically, a lot of that applied livestock data that's generated is conducted on a lot of our research facilities here at the university. From the small ruminant side, pretty thankful that we have 3 locations located across the state. One right here in Worcester at our Worcester Small Ruminant Research Center, where we've got about 300 ewes and another 60 to 90 breeding does on the goat side. We can travel down to Bell Valley, the Caldwell area at the Eastern Ag Research Station. We've got about 400 ewes available there. And if we travel even further south down in the Jackson, at the Jackson Ag Research Station, we've got another 90 Katahdin hair sheep that we're able to use. So realistically, that's where a lot of our livestock research is occurring. And it's not to say that's where it needs to stop, because we'd most certainly like to go into some of these operations. I think some of the challenges are the ability for replication, and we'll talk about that here in just a bit. What are our target audiences for these programs? And really, it's going to be those livestock and forage producers. And who are our stakeholders? Again, those producers, probably some of our commodity groups, members of those commodity groups or members of those commodity groups, and really anybody that wants to be involved. It could even be to the 4-H and FFA level, where those youth have a project for a 6-month stint, but still have a question and perhaps a challenge that a lot of them in their club continually get exposed to. We're certainly here to help address some of those questions as well. Even as small as some really neat, interesting research that you'll see in that eBarns program is that Dr. Ben Winter, he's our lecturer for our small ruminant production course in Columbus, and he did some really neat undergraduate projects just to the simplistic level of the color of the watering bucket for a lamb, which one did they prefer, and the impact of cleanliness on a water bucket as well. This is just a quick screenshot of what is being presented in the current eBarns booklet that we've got out now. You can see beef, small ruminant, manure and nutrients, as well as a little bit of swine research being highlighted. One piece that is cut out of this is the forages aspect, which could arguably go in either or eFields or eBarns, but when it directly applies to the feed application, I believe it needs to be in our eBarns publications here. But pretty excited that when it comes to a lot of our livestock species, small ruminants were the ones that were highlighted the most. So coming back to participation, how can you folks that are joining us today get more involved? Or how can we get us encouraged to kind of summarize some of that research that's based here on campus? So a lot of our applied projects, which can most certainly be done on farm, relating to production or growth, yield, efficiency, economics, if they are available, those are of great interest, not only to us here at the university level, but you folks too at the farm level. Testing new technology, maybe it's a walkover weigh system where the cattle may be going back and forth through a system from feed to water, and they're weighing themselves automatically. That's something that we could test as long as we've got replication and data to be able to do so. What are some industry issues that we've had over over the COVID-19 pandemic? Mortality composting was a big issue. I'm sure many of you are aware of, and especially with the continual impact of avian influenza. When we talk about mortality composting, that information needed to be done in real time. So as we were kind of promoting that from the state and national levels, research was being conducted on those exact practices that we were talking about. And again, answering those on-farm questions, and we'll kind of come up here in the next few slides with some examples, and we're always open to suggestions. For participation, what we're really looking to do is standardize some of our statewide protocols for extension. That's really applicable to a lot of our work when we come to our forages, how these plots need to be set up in order to be easily analyzed from period to period. I really like this picture here. This is from a field day that we did at the small ruminant unit up here in Worcester. And these are sheep out there grazing on some different types of annual forages. And you can see the varieties and kind of see where the sheep are hanging out. Really nice drone image of that. Currently, we're really looking at enhanced fertility for forages, nitrogen management when it comes to that manure application, especially in some of those forage systems, species and cover crops. But really, we're looking for that driven approach based on questions and needs from the clientele. And again, repetition's the key to learning in my book, and I think you'll continue to see that as a theme throughout this presentation. For protocol development, can we implement change on clientele's farm based upon these parameters, the growth of the animal, some of the carcass data if we're large enough and we have the ability to collect some of that information from JBS and others, milk production on a dairy farm, and really the possibilities are endless. If you are interested in it and we're able to successfully measure it, there's no reason we can't take that data and analyze it to help address the question. And there's also some additional questions that are coming from the field and even from the university level here as we're looking at animal health. Ticks are a massive issue, especially as they creep up into the southern part of the state. We've already talked about some of the issues related to AI. Farm economics are always huge. Weather is big when we're talking about not only animal production from a heat stress index, but also from a forage standpoint for growth and quality parameters as well. So just briefly to get some of our wheels turning, I thought I'd highlight the three key areas that our small group is really interested in. We'll start with mine first on the small ruminant impacts, thinking of parasite management, deworming because of parasites, and thinking about our lack of anthelmintics that we have available in the market. Always happy to do some type of residual testing with folks and different anthelmintic treatment strategies. And we can also look at different management strategies. That may be to a simple level of, do I fall breed or do I not fall breed? What happens when I fall breed and I use this type of flushing diet versus another? Again, the key here is that we have to have a control that you're currently doing on your operation, and we've got to have some type of question that we're asking. And the simpler that we can ask it, the easier it is for us to conduct it. And if we've got several questions that we want to ask at one time, we just simply go for it through a stepwise process where we address the first question, get an answer to it, and we move on to the next one. When we think about animal nutrition, if folks are interested in reducing the cost of their feedstuffs, they want to be grazing maybe some of those cover crops that you folks will be hearing about in April. Happy to do that. I've got a very extensive background in grazing cover crops using small ruminants. Then we could also look at alternative feedstuffs. We've got some neat information here at the department level, taking a look at, do sheep really need hay? Can we supplement soybean hulls, peanut hulls, or some other type of fiber source in the place of hay? We already talked a little bit about out of season breeding. We need to have a treatment versus control. However, it can be really difficult to achieve proper replication when we're talking about breeding protocols. And for some of our reproductive phys work or physiology, if you would, we have to have really large numbers in order to have a nice database. From a forage evaluation standpoint, hay versus store feeds, grazing, animal growth, again, replication is needed. And one that's really of interest to some of my producers currently is, how do we feed the hay? I really want to take a deeper dive onto hay waste and how can we decrease hay waste. Maybe that's chopping the forages, reducing the fiber length itself. Maybe it's making it a bit more palatable, comparing dry hay versus baleage, if you would, but also to the standpoint of feeder design and how can we further improve keeping that hay where it needs to be rather than spewed about the ground. Jason Hartshoe's already got some programs and protocols developed when it comes to dairy cattle on farm research. He's got some interest in pre-calf health, or really looking at pre and probiotic usage, what treatment can improve the health and growth of these calves, thinking about simply grain buckets and how they impact feed intake. So is it above the eye or lower than the eye? So does bucket depth affect grain intake of calf growth? Water bucket color, I've already talked about the implications in the sheep world, but why can't we move that to the cattle world as well? Does the color of bucket either entice or discourage calves from drinking out of them? And he's currently working on some other protocols as they relate to milking cows themselves, and those will be coming out shortly. Gar's put together some really nice protocols as well for reproductive technology and beef cattle. He's got some goals here, and he's happy to work with you folks as you've got your questions. But these are some goals comparing the conception, calving, and economic return when comparing different types of protocols of synchronization. So again, we have to know what your current strategy is, and we'll split the herd 2 or 3, 4 different ways where we can have replication and be able to compare what you previously did to the new protocol to see if we can get an increase or improvement in production. Fly control is huge. Taking a look at different fly control methods in a cow-calf operation. Perhaps it's mineral versus no mineral. Maybe it's some of our organic solutions as well. A few others that Garth has available. He's really big into backgrounding and marketing as well as they relate to meat science. Evaluating the health performance of weaning strategies as well as different vaccination programs. And then also from kind of the more economic side on marketing, where can you get those premiums in terms of your cattle operation? Should you retain feeder calves? Should you sell feeder calves? If you decide to sell them, how are you selling them? Lot size, length of wean, castration, vaccination status, weight wise, there's different parameters that we can certainly look at. For forage protocols, pretty simple here, really looking at enhanced fertility when it comes to pasture management. What type of fertilizer protocol can we use to increase forage yield and quality? Sulfur application. Do our forages need sulfur? With a lot of our green energy incentives coming about, we have less and less sulfur available in the atmosphere. So is there a positive or a negative impact associated with the lack of sulfur that we currently have? And if we do supplement sulfur in some of our protocols, does that benefit our forages? When we think about nitrogen fertilization, does this increase our production parameters as compared to, or comparing synthetic versus manure application? And then also species improvement. Are there specific forages that are able to tolerate grazing more than others. And we certainly know that information, but is it applicable at the farm level for that producer that has the specific question? So how are we going to fund this research? There's a lot of opportunities to do so. There's a lot of money actually available at the local, state, and regional level. It just takes some time to take a look at it. There's a lot of commodity groups within the counties, especially our livestock groups. Very fortunate to work in the small ruminant realm. When we talk about sheep production, we've got our checkoff program that supports a lot of research, but we also have several hubs that are county based, but I would argue that they're regionally based as well. Those county organizations are also really receptive and supportive of new information that support their groups. There's opportunity for SARE grant funding. If you're looking at some forage related protocols, there are seed growers and dealers that may make some deals, or if they're interested in the same information, just make sure you make those connections. And then really, it's really taking a look at those progressive growers and wanting to invest into their farms because they can spend this money, but if they don't know how to accurately collect this data and be able to effectively analyze it, they won't know whether their investment that they've done because the salesman down the road encouraged them to do so was worth their money in the long run or not. So just to kind of wrap up our conversation here, for 2022, we had a total of 32 studies. As you can see on the livestock side, proud to say that the small ruminants was able to be the top end on those animals. A lot of that was coming from some of the data that we've already generated here at the university level. But you can kind of see that a lot of our livestock species are already covered here, and we're pretty excited about that. As we move forward, what's next? Really would like to see a lot more swine and poultry. And here in 2023, we're already starting some of our protocols with folks. We've already got some equine studies online as well. So again, we'd like to expand our breadth and our reach. We'd like to be on farm a bit more and kind of partner up with a lot more industry clientele as well. And here's a really nice map to round us off here. You can see that there were 19 different research sites, 16 different counties, and you can see that they were just scattered all across the state. And we love to see that, but we'd like to see a lot more red on this state as we continue working through these eBarn protocols. So with that, I'm going to leave you with our contact information here for just a few seconds, how you can get a hold of us. If you've got any questions that are directly related to eBarns and want to get involved right now, or if you've got some data that you're collecting in current day, be sure to get a hold of Garth there at rough.72. He'll be able to get you access to that Teams folder and be able to get you online. But as it comes to developing different livestock protocols, you can see our specializations there. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. And if it's related to manure management or forages, any of us have the ability to assist with that too. So appreciate your time. Appreciate Amber for getting me on board here. And Amber, can I take some questions? Because I may have to take off for a faculty interview that we have here this morning.
Yeah, that's fine. If anybody has questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat box. Otherwise, if no one has any questions yet, we'll move on to Jessica's presentation. We will be taking questions at the end for anything. If Brady, if you do have to jump off, that's fine. I'm not seeing anything show up on my end in the chat or the Q&A box. So go ahead, Jessica.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and attempt to share my screen. Okay, can you see the present or the main title slide there? Let me try to put it in presenter mode. Maybe. Okay, can you still see the title slide?
It still looks like it's on just your PowerPoint. I can see all the bars across the top and the slides down the side.
Every time. I swear, it's like the first time that we do this. All right, let me try this one.
There you go.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and many thanks to Amber and the rest of the water quality team for inviting me to speak a little bit about the work that has been highlighted in eBarns. So I'm currently with the USDA Livestock Behavior Research Unit. But just prior to this, as of last year, I was an assistant professor at Ohio State. So all of the work that I'll discuss this morning was conducted at Ohio State and highlighted in eBarns. So we'll talk a little bit about two studies within my lab. I'm really focused on dairy calf production and health and management. So with that, if my mouse will now, okay. So I don't know how many dairy folks we have on the call today, so I just wanted to give a brief overview of the U.S. dairy industry. So within our dairy industry, we have about 9.5 million dairy cows, so quite a large dairy industry across our country. You can see in this photo on the right, this is the U.S. dairy cow inventory from 2017, but probably looks very similar in 2023. You can see densely populated across the Midwest, and we also have a lot of dairy cows out in California as well. And as many of you probably know, every year we hope that a dairy cow will give birth to at least one dairy calf. So that's easy math for a Monday morning. Approximately 9.5 million dairy calves are born in the US each year. And the females typically remain on the dairy farm as replacements for the future lactating herd. But I say typically because we are seeing quite a few heifers that are sold soon after birth as well. But mostly, and this is where a lot of my research stems from, is within the male dairy calf population. So the male calves are generally sold within the first week of life. And we see a lot of calf movements across the United States after they are sold from the dairy. So I just put these arrows up here, but calves, we receive a lot of calves in Ohio and Indiana from New York, Pennsylvania. We don't see as much movement in the Western United States because these are very large dairy operations and they have a lot of single site operations. So we don't see as many movements in the West, but a lot of transfer of calves across the Midwest, especially. And so once calves are sold from the dairy, I did my PhD all within the dairy production system, and I didn't really know a lot about the male calf production sectors. So once calves are sold, they can either enter bob veal, and this is defined by the USDA as meat from calves that are harvested less than 3 weeks of age, or roughly 60 to 150 pounds. Sorry, I keep losing my mouse. It's disappearing on me. Calves can also go into formula fed veal, and this is meat from calves that are harvested at 23 weeks of age or about 6 months, and that are about 500 to 550 pounds. But the majority of our calves, male calves, predominantly go into the dairy beef sector. So calves that are raised till about 13 months or 1,300 pounds. And I just want to take a couple seconds to talk about some of the welfare considerations in early life for male calves, because that really led to some of the research questions that we asked and then answered that I'll discuss today. So neonatal care on the dairy farm is critical for all calves. And colostrum management is also critical, not just for young calves, but all mammals. And we have seen in some of the literature, there hasn't been a lot of studies within the male calf populations, but the USDA did a national study back in 2019 and found that colostrum management practices differed between male and female calves, with male calves being more likely to receive contaminated colostrum, delayed colostrum feedings, or a lower total volume of colostrum overall compared to the heifer replacement calves. And if calves receive inadequate quality or quantity of colostrum, this could lead to failed transfer of passive immunity, or FTPI. I'll use this acronym quite a bit in this presentation. And so if young calves do not receive adequate colostrum, this really puts them at risk for increased morbidity and mortality, increased duration and contagiousness of disease, reduced performance, so reduced average daily gain or growth rates. If they're a heifer calf, this could lead to reduced milk production throughout the first lactation. And for really all of these reasons, this could lead to increased culling rates from the herd. So we really want to try to reduce that failed transfer of passive immunity. And so once calves are sold from the dairy, again, remember this is within the first week of life typically, Calves can be transported up to 28 hours. So this doesn't always happen, but in the United States, we only have one federal law. That's a 28-hour law that says that calves can be transported, or other livestock species can be transported up to 28 hours. And then after those 28 consecutive hours, they must be offloaded for rest or feed and water. And this is very different to other countries. In Europe, they have regulations that say calves can be transported up to 8 hours. So it just differs a little bit by country. In transport, there's a slew of literature that shows that transport can be stressful for any animal species, but it's particularly stressful for young neonatal calves. Typically, they're fasted during this time, which can lead to hypoglycemia or dehydration. In extreme weather situations, such as the weather we're experiencing now, although it's kind of warm today here in Indiana, but young calves transported in the hot summer months or very cold winter months outside of their thermoneutral zones could lead to dehydration in either case, and potentially discomfort. Just to give you a couple of examples, this isn't an exhaustive list. During transport, bracing against truck movements, so this could influence not only injuries, but potentially meat quality and pathogen exposure. So a lot of our livestock trailers, they're not very pristine, so calves can be exposed to different pathogens or biofilms that are harboring pathogens within the environment and get infected very quickly. And it's not always, a straight shot to the calf's destination. So approximately 68% of calves are sold through a live auction. And in these environments, they're always a new environment for a young calf. So the novelty or, different animal handlers could influence the stress level in those animals. They're commingled with unfamiliar animals, sometimes other species at high stocking densities. And again, risk of pathogen exposure within the livestock environment. Back in, this was pre-COVID, so it's all a blur. I think it was 2017, we sampled different livestock auctions here in Ohio, and then also in Wisconsin, specifically looking for within the environment. And we just put on boot swabs and walked around the auction environments and actually found that 94% of those samples in the Ohio auctions were positive for salmonella, and nearly 100%, so 99% of the samples in Wisconsin were actually positive for salmonella as well. So again, high risk for pathogen exposure in those auction environments. And recent research by our group actually suggests that young calves are sold more than once. So about 35% of calves that we received when we were doing research in Ohio, about 35% of those came from another livestock dealer or another live auction, suggesting they were at least sold 2 times. So with this, we see prolonged fasting as calves are not readily fed or watered within these environments. Again, they're novel with new people handling them, and then multiple transportation events throughout the early life marketing process. So again, with all that in mind, the care on the dairy farm all the way on through to indirect consignment, we are really interested in, what is the health status or the condition of these calves once they arrive to their destination. And for the study that I'm going to talk about today, that destination was a slaughter facility. So we, in the summer of 2021, we assessed 12 different calf cohorts at a large slaughter establishment that processed a lot of bob veal in Ohio, and we had 420 calves that we assessed within the study. And once calves arrived to the slaughter facility, we took a blood sample. Again, we were interested in failed transfer of passive immunity, so if calves received adequate colostrum on the dairy farm of birth. And then we were also interested in hypoglycemia, so if we could get an estimate of potentially how long the calves were off of feed or milk. We also did a clinical health examination. We assessed calves' body condition. We did a skin test to assess any clinical signs of dehydration and depression. We looked for various disease signs that are common for young calves, such as diarrhea, navel inflammation, and any signs of respiratory disease. We also took every animal's fever, and then assessed for any injuries. As you can see, this is not at the slaughter establishment, but my research associate here, he's assessing the joints for any inflammation. And we also palpated the ribs and tail to see if the calves had any broken bones. Okay, so what did we observe? So each one of these bars represents the prevalence or the average of the poor health outcome that you can see, all the different clinical health outcomes across the x-axis here. So the most prevalent health concerns were hypoglycemia and dehydration in this calf population. So about 74% of the calves arrived hypoglycemic and 69% were dehydrated. About 40% we considered to have a thin body condition, and about 1 out of every 4 calves had navel inflammation. So swelling of the navel, and sometimes has a discharge and doesn't smell very great, but navel inflammation is painful for young calves. So this is something that we're concerned about. And also about 24%, 23% had failed transfer of passive immunity. Then we saw a lower prevalence of depression. About 15% of calves had diarrhea. Fewer had respiratory disease signs because they were very young, so we expected that. And about 6% had any broken bones. But what was interesting with this study is that we actually, half of our calf population was female. So we weren't really expecting with this study to be able to tease out any differences between male calves or female calves. But because half of the population was female, we were able to do that. And we found that male calves relative to female calves are more likely to be hypoglycemic. So about 3 times more likely to have hypoglycemia. And male calves are also more likely to have navel inflammation as well. So this was kind of a basic study. We didn't really know the condition of calves once they're, arriving to the different facilities. In this case, it was a slaughter establishment. And I think that's a really good starting place where we can identify the potential risk to welfare. And as Dr. Campbell talked about, we really want to engage the livestock producers in any improvement efforts. So how can the data that we collect at the slaughter establishment or at the farm, how can that be used to then generate on-farm change and hopefully generate outcomes in the animals as well? And so one approach, and this is kind of a segue into the second project that we did, but one approach to producer engagement that has been used a lot, not just within farm animal research, but that's one of benchmarking. So this process basically is where you give folks, in this case, this was dairy producers, but giving the dairy producers feedback about their farm's performance relative to their peers. So if they have a good understanding of how their animals are performing relative to other farms in the area, that might motivate on-farm change just by giving them access to that data. And so there was a study done in 2017 by Atkinson. This was up in Canada. But what they did was they visited 18 farms, 18 dairy farms in this case, and they again took a blood sample to assess failed transfer of passive immunity. So if calves were receiving adequate colostrum or potentially not. And then this is the prevalence of failed transfer of passive immunity here. And they just basically put across, how each farm was doing, and then let that dairy producer know, hey, here's your farm number 6, about 25% of your calves did have failed transfer of passive immunity relative, and you can see how the other farms fall there. And what they found in that study was that on the farms, after receiving this information, after they had access to their own data relative to their peers, if they did make a management change in colostrum management, they found that overall the failed transfer of passive immunity declined from 21 to 11%. So you can see in these little, the black triangles there for farm number 1, before they had access to their calf health information, failed transfer of passive immunity was 40%, but then after they made a management change, this fell to about 10%. So you can see a decline in most farms. Here at farm number 2, there was no change, but overall, this did seem to improve failed transfer of passive immunity, and they also benchmark average daily gain as well, and saw improvements there with average daily gain. So we kind of took a similar approach. This had never been done with surplus calf populations or male dairy calf populations. So we invited 13 Ohio dairy farms to participate in this study. And we had assessed over 1,000 calves. This was back in 2021 as well. We assessed calves at 2 different assembly yards. So this was during the marketing process, and this was in Wayne County, Ohio. So we had two large assembly yards, and we took a similar approach to what the design that I kind of talked about in the Bob veal calf welfare. So we took a blood sample, and we were interested in failed transfer of passive immunity, and then all the clinical health parameters that we had assessed at the slaughter plant, we assessed here as well. So very, very interested in navel inflammation and dehydration and failed transfer of passive immunity predominantly because those were the large health concerns that we saw. And then what we did was we reported this information back to half of the producers that were enrolled in this study. So we had a control group and then an intervention group that received information on their calf health. And then we monitored calves from those farms for an additional 6 months to see if the delivery of that information or the delivery of those reports had any influence on calf health. This is just to quickly show you what the benchmark reports actually looked like. You can see at the top here, this is transfer of passive immunity. So we had 2 different periods. So period 1, as you can see here, this is kind of our baseline period. So before farmers received their benchmarking report, and then period 2 is after the delivery of that report. And so we reported the proportion of calves that had successful passive transfer of immunity. So we kind of wanted to flip it, instead of saying how many calves had failed, we wanted to show how many had successful passive transfer of immunity. You can see on this particular farm from the baseline period of period 1, they had only 50% that had successful transfer of passive immunity, but that went up to 67% after the delivery of this information. And then again, we also benchmark hydration. So this would be with the black box farm number 7, but relative again to the peers, and then across the 2 periods. And then the proportion of calves that had healthy navels. And what we found, this is still, we're still in the process of data analysis because we just wrapped this up. It was last year, probably about August, was the end of our 6-month period post benchmarking delivery. So this just shows the proportion of calves that were dehydrated after the delivery of the benchmark report. So this is for the control group that didn't receive that information. You can really see no change there. About 72 to 74% of calves were dehydrated overall. But for the intervention group, we did see a reduction. Pre-delivery of the benchmark reports, about 64% of calves were dehydrated, but we did see a reduction there. A significant reduction to about 50%. However, we didn't see any influence on transfer of passive immunity or navel health. So just kind of wrap up on these 2 particular projects. Again, just within the first week of life, calves can be at risk for welfare compromise. And we have seen clinical concerns on arrival to either slaughter or calf raising facilities. So we will continue research strategies on the dairy farm of birth, also during consignment or during the sale process, and on arrival. This is a project we just wrapped up, giving calves electrolytes for different durations to see if that would influence any health outcomes post-transport. So regardless of their destination, across the 3 calf sectors, we should continue this line of work. So with that, just many thanks again to Amber and the water quality team for the invitation this morning, to my collaborators and our research team. None of this is possible without a large team, to the USDA NIFA for funding this work, and just to the slaughter establishment and assembly yard personnel for allowing us onto their facilities to capture this data, and to the dairy producers that were engaged as well. So hopefully I wasn't too long-winded. There's my contact information if you have any questions, and I can hang around for questions at the end as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. And again, if anybody has questions for her, feel free to put them in the chat, the Q&A. We can take those at the end. Otherwise, we're going to let Courtney come up next.
Awesome, thank you. Let's make sure I can get my screen shared today. Can you see it?
Yeah, looks good.
Perfect. All right, well, I am Courtney Krieger. I am a Water Quality Extension Associate for Fulton, Lucas, and Williams counties. Today I'm going to be talking about some composting pen pack cattle manure research that was done here in Fulton County. My colleague Eric Rieker kind of started this composting project, and I've got the chance to work with some of the data as we have gone through. So why we started these composting trials. So we here in Fulton County, we have around 40 manure storage barns in Fulton County with over 30,000 head of cattle. So there's a lot of manure that's going around in Fulton County. So kind of looking at ways that we can manage this manure and ways to do things different with it. So we also looked at the agronomic benefits of manure, hauling it to remote fields. Legacy phosphorus is a really big issue around manure storage facilities. So kind of being able to haul it a little farther away from those manure storage facilities. And then all of this research was focused in the Western Lake Erie Basin. We have a lot of H2 Ohio projects up here. So kind of looking at those rules and regulations as well. So our goals for this project, like I said, our goal was to move these nutrients away from fields that have often received heavy amounts of manure in the past. Doing this by reducing the weight and volume for an easier transportation. Farmers are having to make less trips to the field, so they're more likely to haul that manure or that compost farther than what they would if they were left with that manure project. Also increasing the storage capacity of buildings. When we're reducing that volume, you're going to have a lot more room to store that compost product. And then we also we're hoping to create a more stable, nutrient-dense product in the composting process. So the overview of our project, this research, the research that's published in eBarns was from 2021 data. So we were looking at 8 windrows then with 258 tons of fresh manure is what we started with. All of our producers weighed in to ensure that we knew what our starting amounts were. We had 5 different cooperatives that we were working with 5 different manure storage buildings. And in turn, they all did an agronomic field trial with us in the end, comparing that manure and compost. So the process of how this all kind of worked out. So we started by weighing in all that fresh manure to know exactly what we were starting with. And then we formed those windrows, took a sample before we turned the compost at all, to ensure that we were starting with that raw manure to see exactly what nutrients were in it. And then we tracked the temperatures of the compost from the start to the finish on some of them. Some of them we were tracking just the day we were turning. Then the turning of the actual windrows, that varied throughout the different windrows that we had, but that was another huge part of this process. And then scaling out that finished compost product to see kind of what reductions we saw. And then we also did field trials at the end of the process to see kind of the agronomic effect of the compost versus the manure. So this is a picture of what our windrows looked like. We measured or weighed in that raw manure, and then we formed these windrows that were approximately 6 foot tall by 12 foot wide by 100 foot long. The size is pretty important to ensure that that compost turner can get through and really efficiently turn that manure product to ensure that everything's getting mixed in there. So there in these pictures, you can kind of see what we were working with for our windrows, and we had 8 of those in our first year trial going around. So the sampling process is a fun one. We collected 3 samples of raw manure prior to the windrow being turned at all. So from all 8 of our windrows, we pulled 3 samples, and then we continued to collect 3 samples per windrow directly after we turned it. And we tried to stay relatively in the same area of each one. That way we could track all the way through kind of the change of nutrients that we saw from start to finish. It was a really cool to kind of see how those nutrients changed each week or bi-weekly, depending on how often the farmer chose to turn their piles. So we sent all of our samples to A&L Great Lakes. We can see here kind of some of the really big things that we were looking at. So that moisture was a big factor that we saw a change in over time. And then our phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, and nitrogen, also some really big areas that we looked at in change in the nutrients. And we'll kind of see some graphs later on of how those nutrients changed over time. So here's a video of the compost turner running. I'm not sure if you have sound, but this is just kind of an overview, what we got to go out and see every week, turning those compost piles to ensure that it's cooking. One really important thing in this composting process is the temperature of those compost piles. We had 3 day of turn temperatures that we recorded. So we used that thermometer over here on the left. We would stick those in the day we went out to turn the compost to ensure that it was at the right temperature, to ensure that that compost was still cooking. Looking to keep it in between 140 and 160 degrees. That's kind of the prime temperature to ensure that it's doing what it's supposed to and kind of breaking those organisms down and doing everything it needs. And then we also had 3 temperature loggers that stayed in all the time, except when we pulled that when we turned that compost, we would pull them out and then they would go right back in. So we can see here, they were called hobo trackers, kept a log of our temperatures the entire time that we were doing this composting process. So we can see here down at the end, it starts to get a little cooler, and that kind of shows that that composting was getting close to being finished and that that product was almost ready. This is just another video of that compost. So our windrow turning, we had 6 windrows that turned once per week, every 6 to 8 weeks. So we would go out and sample once a week on those windrows, and then 2 of our windrows were turned every other week for that 6 to 8 weeks. So we only had about four turns on that one. So a few less, but kind of still seeing how those nutrients changed over time. So now we're going to get into the change in the nutrient concentration. This is kind of the big deal, what we saw happen over time. So the moisture in our fresh manure average over our 8 windrows started at about 66%, and our finished compost ended with a 48%. So we had a really big decrease in that moisture overall. Our total nitrogen stayed about the same, went down about 0.5, but the rest of our nutrients we can see as we go across our graph almost doubled, which means that we created, we reached one of our goals. We created a much more nutrient dense product. You can see the phosphorus went from an 8 to a 20, potassium from a 14 to a 31, and then sulfur and calcium both also doubled there. This research is continuing. We're continuing this research, and we are seeing these same results as we go. So it's really great to see that we reached one of those goals of creating a much more nutrient dense product, and we also got to kind of reduce the moisture that was in there, and also the volume and the weight of that product as well. So now we're going to look at these field trials. These are kind of what was published in the eBarns report. So we had 3 corn field trials comparing compost to fresh manure, 1 wheat field comparing compost to nothing, 1 corn field comparing compost to fresh manure and commercial fertilizer. And then all 3 of those treatments in that trial did meet the tri-state recommendations for the fertilizer. So here we can see a picture of the compost versus fresh manure side by side. This was same day application. You can see that compost is a much darker color, much more nutrient dense product than that fresh manure is. It's really cool to see those side by side. And I've got some overview pictures as well that you can see in that field trial. So our manure was spread with a manure spreader. You can see that video here. This is the compost being spread on one of our, the field trial. And then over here, you can see that alternate strips of manure versus compost. You can just see the difference in the product that we have there. That darker colored one being that compost, and then the lighter color being that fresh manure. So now we're going to look at some of our data that we received back from our looking at the yields in these trials. So this one was comparing manure and compost. The manure was applied at 10 tons per acre, and then the compost was only applied at 5 tons per acre. We can see there was no statistical difference in the yield, so they both were yielding around the same, but we can see that we did apply about half the amount of compost that we did in that than we did the manure. Again, here, this is the second corn grain trial. This one they did a check, so looking at nothing applied, and then 6 tons of manure per acre and 3 tons of compost per acre. And again, no statistical difference in the yields here. But again, they applied half as much compost as they did to that manure. So it's interesting to see that it was still yielding in the same amount as that manure was. A silage corn trial here. We did compared the manure and the compost again, and we're looking at 5 tons per acre of compost and 10 tons of manure. So looking kind of at the same as we have in the last two. And again, no statistical difference yielding, but again, we are applying half the amount of compost as we are manure. This is a wheat trial, so no manure topside dress applied, which was our check. And then our compost trial was looking at 3 tons of manure compost top dressed. And again, we didn't see a statistical difference across those. The interesting one we've got here is looking at our tri-state fertilizer versus a manure versus a compost. So we can see that statistically, the compost and the tri-state fertilizer had a statistical difference between those two. And then again, the manure was also statistically different. So both the manure and the compost out yielded that tri-state fertilizer, which is a potash, an MAP, and an MAS or AMS combined. So here's just another video. You can see, I'm going to play this after. You can see that that steam is rolling off that compost. That's how you know that you've got a good product cooking. You know that your temperatures are all up and ready to go. So this infographic here we created with our 8 compost piles that we started with the first year. You can see that that chart across the top is one that we looked at. Some more really cool information that we saw was we started with 258 tons of fresh manure, and in the end ended with 121 tons of compost. So we reduced the weight by half, overall reducing our load reduction by 28%. And then this really cool statistic, an average of 4.5 miles was traveled from the barn to the field. So farmers were moving their compost product a little bit farther away. So those fields right around your manure storage facilities aren't receiving all of those nutrients like had been in the past frequently. So some continued research, we are still doing this. We added 4 more windrows in 2020, and we're currently processing all of that data and trying to get it added into our infographic. And then we are continuing this research in 2023. We're working on 4 different windrows right now and possibly another one. So we're going to have some more really great research to see how these composting piles kind of can change, and we can see the nutrient changes tracked over the turning time. A special thanks to the Great Lake Commissions. They allowed us to do this research on a grant, and also a thank you to Eric Rieker for allowing me to help. I do have an evaluation here. If you guys could take a minute to scan this QR code, or I can drop that link in the chat as well. Just any feedback on my presentation today, I would greatly appreciate it. And I am going to hand it back over to Amber for any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Courtney. If you guys want to scan her QR code, I think she's going to put that in the chat. If you guys will fill that out for her. It's just an evaluation we use to improve when we teach. Otherwise, that is the last of our speakers. Anyone who has questions, feel free to submit them in the Q&A or the chat box. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, so we have a thanks for all of our speakers for speaking today. I do think that Brady jumped off, but if you have any questions for him, I can send those to him. Otherwise, his email address is the campbell.1279. So if you do have any questions for him, those can be sent to him. Otherwise, I know Jessica's still here, Courtney's still here. Feel free to ask them any questions you guys may have. Otherwise, I can ask a question to them. So I'll ask one for Jessica first. So you were looking at the failed passive transfer. Do you think it's not that the farmers don't have the data because once you applied it, like you supplied it to them, they saw an improvement, or is it some other kind of problem that you're seeing?
Yeah, with colostrum, in hindsight, I wish we would have systematically went back and interviewed those dairy producers, but hindsight's always 2020, right? I think with colostrum, it's a very high quality resource. So I think oftentimes, it's economics involved as well. So I talked to a lot of producers and like, we don't have any different, protocols. And there's a lot that don't have different protocols for heifers or bulls. But I do think sometimes it's an economic decision, and sometimes those higher valued resources are sometimes given to the heifer calves that, they have a return of investment on. And in our current economic climate, especially for dairy producers, those bull calves aren't bringing a lot of money. So yeah, I think it's just one of those high valued resources that sometimes gets prioritized to the heifers. But
Okay,
it's a tough, good question.
thanks. Courtney, do you see that there is one in the Q&A for you about the manure compost?
Yep, I just saw that. So the 6 to 8 weeks, we had seen on that one temperature log, you could kind of see that the temperature starts to drop below that 140 to 160 range, meaning that the compost isn't doing as much. I'm sure if you continue to turn it, you're going to still see some changes, but we saw the most changes within that 6 to 8 week range that we were turning that compost.
Oh, and then I see one in the Q&A that just popped up for Jessica.
Yeah, what percentage of dairy calves are males? Has sex semen influenced this percentage? Yeah, absolutely. We do see sex semen and dairy producers, using that strategically on their operations. So it maybe has reduced a little bit. I can't say exactly across the United States what proportion are males versus females right now. Don't have that data off the top of my head, but it has influenced. Has influenced that proportion. Maybe has made it gone down a little bit, as has beef genetics. We've seen that. Within especially the male calves, we've seen a lot more crosses in the dairy beef industry and using beef genetics as well. So yes, it has influenced it. By how much, I can't tell you specifically, but dairy producers are very strategic with their breeding practices. Absolutely.
Awesome, thanks, Jessica. And then I don't see any popping up yet. I do have one I'll ask for Courtney. Courtney, do you want to go over the equipment you guys needed to have for the farmer to have to be able to compost manure?
Yeah, so we rented a Case IH tractor. I could get the exact what we rented, and then the compost turner. Let me pull it up so I can tell you exactly what the one was. There's a lot of different options. You do not have to use the exact one that we did. People have a lot of different ways to do it. Let me get the exact one that we used. So it was an HCL compost turner, 110 horsepower with a Case IH 190 Magnum. So those are the equipment that we used. The farmers did not have to have that. We provided that for them as kind of an incentive for them to do that with us. But there are a lot of different options, smaller options, so you don't have to have as large of a windrow. And there's a lot of different studies coming out about having things that you don't have to have the compost turner. You can just have something to funnel the air through. So lots of new research hopefully coming in the future.
And then I see another one for you, Courtney, in the Q&A.
Yes. So Kayla, we did not have the chance to do any water quality data with this. I think that's something hopefully now we could be able to do. We did not test if the amount of nutrient runoff was reduced. Hopefully that is something we can test in the future though.
Awesome. So those are the questions I had. Feel free to keep submitting any if you guys in the audience have any. Otherwise, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. There's all the email addresses of everyone who spoke, and the water quality associate email goes to all of us on the water quality team. So that's one way you could contact any of us. This is the CACA credits. So if you need those, you feel free to scan that QR code. I am going to host a poll real fast. For those of you who need CLM credits, please answer that. And we'll take the names of you that answered the poll and submit them for CLM credits. Otherwise, if there's no more questions, as you submit for the CLM credits, or if you need the QR code for CCA credits, otherwise, that's all we have for you today, and we thank you for joining us. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you hopefully at one of our next webinars.